from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in, explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today I'm very pleased joining me, Thom Dennis. Thom, the way I love to do it is I keep it to my guests to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit more about you, what you are currently up to, and then we can start the discussion from there. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mehmet. It's good to meet you and to be with your audience. So I've been involved in leadership development for, it's over 40 years now. I was in the military, the Royal Marines, for 17 years, and I learned a lot about leadership and ended up being involved in teaching of leadership, which I had never set out to do. It wasn't my aspiration, but it was great, and I learned a great deal. And when I came outside, I looked for an organization where I could continue what I'd been doing at the Royal Naval College, which was effectively coaching, although nobody called it that in those days. So I started coaching, and then I did a master's in that. And really, the way the master's was formed was so that we looked at individuals, we looked at groups, and we looked at organizational level. And that's the way that I work. I coach one-on-one, I develop teams, I facilitate offsites wherever they are in the world. It's a great opportunity for me to travel, and I have traveled all over the world facilitating important meetings. And at an organizational level, I help them change their cultures. And essentially, I've been doing the same work really for the last 33 odd years with various organizations in various countries. And I've lived in a number of countries and really enjoyed working with different cultures, understanding the differences and what brings us together and what pulls us apart. I'm speaking a little bit more now about what is important to me, because I think the leadership skills that got us to where we are in the world today are not necessarily the ones that are going to take us forward. So I'm quite passionate about that.
That's cool. I'm looking forward to know more about these things you're passionate about, Thom. So usually what I do, before we come here and we start to record the episode, I go over, whatever information I can get my hands on to prepare. And I saw one term which, the name itself attracted me. So I've seen you have pioneered what's called conscious leadership development. And, of course, I got it myself, but I think it's something that the audience should be aware of. So if you can explain to us, what do you mean by conscious leadership? What does it entail? And why do you think it's crucial in today's, especially in the business world?
Thank you. I think that the way that leaders have performed in the past has been, on the whole, really quite directive. You create a company, or you're leading a company, and you have an idea, and what you say goes, and that's the way it happens. And that is a style of leadership, and depending on the quality of and the vision of that leader, you can have some good results. But the world is becoming ever more complex. And there are so many more pressures on leaders today than there were in the past. And so for me, I think what is incredibly important is for a leader to understand their beliefs, understand their values, understand that their conditioning, their life's conditioning will drive the way that they perform and that they interact with other people. And so I think today things like relationships are really important. They probably always have been, but they've taken on a greater weight now, and a sense of responsibility amongst leaders for the impact that they have on their people, on the organization, and of course, increasingly now, their impact on the environment. All of these things are dynamics which mean that the leader has got to understand themselves better. They've got to understand what's driving them, understand when they get really upset, what is that's making them upset, because people tend to take out upset on the person that's nearest to them, and it's very rarely the appropriate place. And so being able to take real responsibility for one's thoughts and one's actions, the way you live out your passions and so on, is something that leaders really need to have a really good handle on. So conscious leadership is that sense of understanding oneself to the extent that when you take decisions, you're looking at, you're aware of where that decision is coming from, much deeper than perhaps, right, let's just do this. Never mind, and I've worked with organizations where I often ask them, when a CEO makes a decision, and I say to him or her, what are the unintended consequences of this? Have you thought those through? And very, very often, they don't want to talk about that because they made the decision and let's get on with it. But sometimes taking a moment or two to reflect actually can lead to much better decision making. And that's all part of being conscious in the way that we lead.
I got it, Thom. So it's like, just think about the consequences of the decisions, that these leaders would take. It's about, thinking thoroughly and deeply about the, how a decision might affect not only the business, sometimes it might affect, also the lives of the people, whether their income, their economic status, and so on. So, yeah, so that's really deep. Now, one thing you kept repeating in the introduction and now also, which also like kind of, for me, I always talk about, the culture of the company, the culture of the place, even if they are a non-profit organization or profit-based organizations. We talk about the culture a lot. And sometimes we hear the word, okay, we should be doing a pivot, we should do a cultural transformation, right? So when it comes to transforming the culture, changing the culture into an organization, what do you think are the most common challenges they face? And, how do you think are the best way to overcome these obstacles?
I think that one of the initial challenges about doing a culture change is the length of time that it takes. Change a culture, really, you've got to be prepared to be working on it for at least 3 years. And in today's business world, honestly, there aren't that many CEOs who last 3 years. So and that makes it very difficult because it means that the leadership that takes the decision to really fundamentally, right, we really want to change in a particular way, may not be the leadership that sees that journey through. And when a new CEO comes in, they almost always want to make their own mark. and they tend to stop whatever's going on, and that's disastrous. So I always, it's one of the first things I do when a CEO says, I want to change my culture. I say, well, how long are you going to be around for? Because we need that continuity and the dedication. If that person is going to move on, that the person who takes over is prepared to work with the work that's been done. Otherwise, you waste an enormous amount of resource. And what's more, you create a lot of cynicism in the organization. If you talk to middle managers in many organizations, they will say, oh, yeah, we had a new initiative, but these come down from the C-suite pretty regularly. So all we do is whenever one comes down, you say, right, keep your head down. It'll last about 6 months, and then it'll fade away. So if you just keep your head down, it'll be all right. And actually, we won't have to change anything. And what that highlights is the resistance, the natural human resistance to change. Lots of people say, "Oh, I love change, and I'm all for change. I really enjoy it." I'm not sure that's always true. It's an easy one to say, just like an awful lot of managers tell you that they're really good listeners when they're not. So I think that it's really important to think that through. And then in terms of changing a culture, you've got to be willing to look at the leadership in the eye and say to them, right, you want to change the culture. The culture is driven from your office. So that means the first place we've got to look in terms of changing the culture is how you are and how you are behaving and the culture that you are creating by what you're doing. And that can be an uncomfortable conversation. Obviously, it's a fantastic one if the CEO has the courage to say, yeah, I get that. You know, I'm so passionate about making a success, making the profit, you know, growing, whatever it is. That's brilliant. And being willing to say, okay, I'm not perfect. I probably am driving this in a particular way, and I can see that it's not working for everybody. And if it's not working for everybody, the chances are it's affecting my bottom line in some way. So if I can get that sorted out, it's going to release us to be even more successful, even better than we are today. And if you have that kind of attitude, that's fantastic. And then you can do some work. But culture is driven from the top, not uniquely, but it is driven from the top, and it pervades everything. So we've really got to, I always say, when I come in, I like to look under the carpets and behind the wallpaper and see where these things are really ingrained and what is the, what's the benefit to people to keep it the way it is so that we can start to work with that and bring about something that's more positive.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense to me. Now, continuing a little bit into the same space of, you know, changing culture and strategies. And I know, like, Thom, you work yourself in different sectors, like energy, banking, and so on, and technology. So how does that change from sector to sector? Like, does it really matter which sector they are in? And, you know, and it's like kind of a two questions or loaded question as well. And in some situations, so there's the sector part, and the other one is maybe this company, they have multiple regional coverages. And for example, maybe they are a US-based company, but they have operations in Europe, in Asia, and Middle East. So how, you know, these cultural nuances, like you think the leaders should be aware about when they decide to do that?
Well, I think from a sector point of view, there is a certain difference. I think age of an organization can affect the culture probably more than the sector. But I think in some look, take oil and gas or energy. These are organizations where safety is absolutely fundamental, and over the years they've learned that in order to have, for instance, a safe oil rig. I've worked in refineries. I've worked with oil drilling companies, and the culture of, I never forget getting into a minibus. We'd been I'd been running an offsite all day, and the leadership team, we got into a minibus together, and the lead, who was the CFO actually, got into the seat next to the driver, and the driver was about to drive away, and the CFO goes, "Stop." And he turned around to everybody and said, "Has everybody got their seatbelt on?" Now, that was so deeply ingrained in the culture. It's like you're not allowed to walk down the stairs unless you've got a hand on the hand rail. Things like that, which in most organizations, well, no, for goodness sake, we're all grown-ups. But that's because safety isn't so ingrained. So in some ways, there are differences. And of course, the speed that people work at in some sectors is a lot faster. And I suppose, I've worked a lot in the pharmaceutical world, and one of the things that I really notice is when you bring different people from different disciplines, you bring a statistician and a pharmacist and a doctor and a marketing person together in a room, and they have to create something that's really positive and is really going to work. A lot of organizations, they're more siloed, and so you don't get that cross-functional need to be really effective and efficient. So I think one does come across differences across different organizations, but at the end of the day, we're dealing with human beings, and from that point of view, it's completely the same. But I think where you've got tech, or you've got engineers, or you've got accountants, all of these tend to be sort of more left brain, more logical thinking people, as opposed to when you're in a business that's sort of a music business, or another business where there's creativity. Fashion, for instance. I've worked with some fashion houses. There, the atmosphere is very, very different. It's great, actually. I love the way things are different in that sense. I've forgotten, you asked me a second part of that question.
Yeah, so it was about, the different regions, different cultures.
Yes, different regions. Well, of course, that is important. And I think that if you have a French company that takes over a British business, an English business, which there's quite a few examples of that, and they send somebody from France who's never worked outside France, that person's going to have a bit of difficulty dealing with an English workforce. I've worked with a Japanese robotics company that set up a site in the UK. And, the Japanese way of doing things, the mindset, applying that to English engineers, that caused some problems. And I think sometimes the US, the Americans, when they come over to Europe, or actually anywhere outside of the US, depending on their experience, can often think that the way things are done at home is the way that things should be done everywhere else. And I remember facilitating an offsite in Kuala Lumpur, and there were 32 different nationalities in the room. And that was such a huge sort of demonstrator to me of how different people will approach a problem differently, and they will react to other people in the room very differently. This is why I've done quite a lot of work with the Cultural Intelligence Center, which is an American organization. And one of the things that we do there is take people through a development program where they explore themselves and how they interact with difference. You know, we have so many international companies today. It's really important that people appreciate difference. And it's quite important. I just have sort of pigeonholed France, England, America a little bit in what I said, but one has to be careful of that, because we are, as I said, human beings first, and then we have the culture that we were brought up in, and then we have our experience and our conditioning since then. One of the best coaching relationships I've ever had was with a French biologist who had spent time in the UK and America, as well as his basic upbringing in France. And that internalization of him made him so much more flexible and adaptable in different environments, as opposed to someone who's just spent all his time in one culture and hasn't experienced others. I think it's so important that people really explore themselves and how they react and respond to all the different things. You know, how am I with people with disabilities? How am I with somebody who doesn't look like me? How am I with somebody whose first language is not my first language? All of these things, that there is a process, there's a training that you can do, which actually can really develop people's ability and success in relating with different people. And that's important.
It is indeed, Tom. And yeah, to your point, like I've seen like companies, they think that we always done it this way. I mean, in their culture or like in their geographies, and then they struggle when they go out and find this, and they have their cultural shock themselves. Oh, we didn't know that you do it this way, right? So, but what you just mentioned like makes a lot of sense if they can have such trainings and get the proper I would say guidance on how to deal with such situations. Now, one thing which related a little bit to not only cultural shifts actually, and I'm sure like leaders usually they have to do it maybe on daily basis, and maybe they themselves they found themselves inside that, which is conflict resolution, right? So one of the things, whether you have a small business, big business, doesn't matter. You are a startup or an established company. So conflict will happen. And I know like this is one of the things that also you focus on in your work, Tom. So I know we can go a lot here, but what are like some of the techniques that you find most effective when, you have these high stakes situations, because it's like a significant conflict. Maybe it's affecting big projects, big decision, maybe between the founder and the investor, between, different people.
Yeah, it's, I remember going to Cameroon once, and there was an oil rig in refit, and there were 3 teams involved. There was the dockyard team, there was the project team, and there was the rig team. And each of them had their own agenda, and each of them were doing their own thing, with the best intentions, of course. These things always come from the best intentions. Well, normally. But it was a disaster, and it was costing, literally millions of dollars extra over and above what the project had been projected to cost. And so I had to sit down with them all. And actually, I had another example of that a few years before that, where you may remember there was a fire in the tunnel under the English Channel between England and France. There was a huge fire, and they had to get that cleared fast because no trains were getting through, and it was costing them an absolute fortune every hour that the trains weren't running. And somebody said, right, let's get this refurbishment team, and I suppose we better have some French and some English people involved in this because it's the entente cordiale and getting this to work together. And the French were ostensibly in the lead, and they didn't speak English. And the English people had their own opinions, and they didn't speak French. And they were supposed to be getting on and under huge pressure to get this job done in the shortest amount of time. So it happened that I spoke both languages. So I got these people in a room. I mean, that's the first thing. Let's get people in the room. And then the next thing is get them to listen to each other. I think when people get very upset, they're much more interested in somebody else hearing them as opposed to them hearing someone else. So creating a space which fosters listening, and also establishing a common objective where everybody can say, yeah, that's where we're going. If we can get that common ground and then start listening to each other. So often people say, oh God, I didn't really, I can see where you're coming from now. You get that sort of opening of conversation, and from that you can build. But you have to establish safety and a common objective, and then this willingness to listen, and then you can work from there.
So it's open communication, you mean, Thom? Like, have the communication open, try to understand the other side, how they are, as you said, like where they are coming from, what's their point of view, and then, things can get better. Now, you mentioned a couple of times about, the offsite, and I believe you're referring to some of these like executive retreats, right? So what makes, strategic planning retreat or transformational development workshop in your opinion? Because I know like also you organize that a lot. Because, I've interviewed once, someone was saying like this should be planned in a way. And another time I spoke to someone else, he was telling me it should be designed in this way. So a lot of thoughts about what's the best way to have a strategic planning retreat, or what it's sometimes called transformational development workshop. So what's the best way to plan these events, and what outcomes you believe, the executive should expect from these?
That's a great question. It's a big question though. There are different ways. I've just been talking to an organization, and they're looking for a facilitator for a 2-day event in July. And he said, well, how would you do this? And the first thing I had was a whole bunch of questions for him, because actually it's the preparation of these things which is absolutely key, fundamental. So the first thing for me is to understand whose meeting this is, and it might be the CEO, it might be a CFO in a large organization, or a departmental head, whatever. But typically, let's take a CEO. What I'm interested in is what that person wants to get out of this meeting. And they may have some ideas, and they may actually not be quite as sure as they think they are. So that's something that I really like to work through with them. When you walk out of here at the end of whatever it is, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, what do you want to have changed? What do you want to have learned? What do you want to have communicated? What do you want to have decided? It might be setting a new vision for the organization. It might be defining the purpose. It might be just saying, right, what's this year's strategy? Or it could be just a group of people all reporting in together and learning where they each are in their sales process or whatever. I mean, there can be many reasons to bring people together, but let's establish the objectives first off. And what I tend to do then is I do two things. One, I want to know what can't be discussed, because quite often there are issues which are going on, but the CEO doesn't want that particular thing to be addressed because it's a sideline from where that he or she is really wanting to stay focused. Now, I may challenge that because the dynamic of how strong that other side is may really negatively affect things. But we agree on that. And then I need to understand who's going to be in the meeting, because I want to understand what they're bringing in, because all of them tend to have their own aspirations and their own agendas. So I like to speak to, if it's a C-suite team, for instance, I'll speak to them all. If it's a larger meeting, 20 or 30 people, then I'll just find out who the key people are, and if they come from different parts of the world, it's quite useful to speak to them so that I can get a sense of the different dynamics coming from different parts of the world. And what I'm looking for is, as I say, the unspoken. I like to understand what the elephants are in the room before I go into the room. And ideally, I would have discussed those with the CEO so that we can agree how important these things are and where they fit into the whole agenda. So I then plot out an agenda, and normally these things are residential. They're much more powerful, much better when they are. Of course, it's more expensive, but so often the real key communications actually take place in the bar or at dinner in the evening. And I like to facilitate those. So I'm not facilitating just the meeting in the meeting room. I'm facilitating the whole journey from when people, when we start talking about the event through to their arrival and their experience in the venue. And I'm really, I get quite involved in how the venue is set up and the shape of the room, and all those dynamics are really important. And then how do we disperse, and what are the commitments after that? Because very often an organization will say, yeah, we want our offsite. And I say, right, where's the follow-up? Because you're going to come out of this, your tails are going to be up, you're going to be really upbeat and happy and motivated. But then people are going to get back to their office, and there'll be this mound of work they've got to do because they've been away. And a lot of that good feeling dissipates very quickly. And if people have made undertakings to do certain things after the meeting, how do we make sure that they are supported in order to do that? It's not about cracking a whip necessarily. It's about it's the reality of how things are. So how can we make the best out of those objectives? How can we make sure that people have ownership, responsibility, accountability? And then we need to have a follow-up meeting, which might be 3 months later, 6 months or whatever. But it's a journey. It's not just a one-off.
Absolutely. And, one of the feedbacks I always hear, yeah, we did this meeting. Yeah, big talks, big promises, but nothing happened later. And the main reason was maybe the goal was so ambitious, like no one could actually do it. Or to your point also as well, there was no proper follow-up after that meeting. So 100%, I've witnessed it myself also from this perspective. Now, I like to talk about trends, Thom, usually, but this time we're not talking about like technology trends. We're talking about societal trends, right? So what are you seeing, happening outside that companies and of course the leaders of these companies need to take care of so they can stay ahead and adapt their leadership and culture strategies accordingly to these trends?
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the world, and as I've said, the pressures on leaders today are so much greater. Well, is that true? I think people might argue with me on that. I think it is true, but certainly the breadth of pressures, the number of different things that leaders have to deal with today is much greater than it used to be. And those, as you've said, tend to be coming from society. For me, organizations used to kind of define how society saw things. Today, it's the other way around. Society is now defining how organizations have to respond and how they have to run their businesses. And a lot of leaders are truly resistant of that. And I can understand why. But there are these other pressures. So, mental health, physical well-being, the incorporation of people with disabilities, not just visible disabilities, but neurodisabilities and the variety of neural sort of setups that people have. I'm losing the word. In the old days, you just didn't have to worry about all this stuff. But now, and actually the pandemic has really accentuated a lot of this, because a lot of people said, during the pandemic, I realized I'd been working in a particular way for years, and I don't want to do it anymore. I don't like it. I want to have some sort of say in the way that I work, in my work environment, all that kind of thing. And so there has been this push. And of course, there's all the conversations generally about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And some people have put a B on the end, belonging. All the gender identities that people are revealing. I'm not so sure it's that there's a big change in the number of people who have gender differences or perceptions. It's just that it's much more out in the open now. And of course, in different countries, some things are still illegal, and in other countries, they're really being pushed. So for an international company, this can be a big challenge. So again, these are, I remember many years ago, coaching a CEO of an engineering company, and this person knocked on the door and came in and sort of gave the managing director a piece of paper and then walked out, and he explained after this person, who was clearly a woman but was dressed more as a man. He explained that from the following Monday, I can't remember the names, but essentially she had said, "I wish to be addressed as a man, not a woman." So this managing director had never come across anything like this before. And so we had a good conversation about, well, how do you deal with that, and how accepting are we? And because he really wanted to be accepting of this change, but how could he deal with that, and how could he sort of manage all the different reactions that would come from all the different people in the it was a factory. So it's tricky. It's tricky to deal with that. And if you can't just brush it under the carpet. You can't just say, "Oh, it doesn't exist." human beings are, we're all different, and thank God we are. But how do we create the space for difference? And I think that, in a nutshell, is one of the real challenges of leaders today. How do we deal with difference?
Absolutely, Tom. And I think this is top of mind because, to your point, maybe I'm repeating some of the things you mentioned, and but I need to highly agree with you, especially on the point when you mentioned the pandemic. It changed the way people look at how they do things, because they took some. While a lot of people see it negative and lockdowns, of course, no one can disagree with this. But what happened, it also gave people moment of reflection on the way they do work. And I agree highly with you that there was this moment of reflection. Hey, 1 second, why I'm doing this? It can be done in different ways. So, and of course, this is a continuous challenge. Now, as we always come to an end, and I want to hear from you, Tom, because as I was telling you before we started, we focused a little bit on on founders of startups, but they need the leadership and they need, of course, to deal with all this. So if you want to leave us today with words of wisdom for these people who are becoming leaders today, they are leading, a startup, but maybe in a couple of years, they will become a big company. Maybe they will become a unicorn. Who knows? So leave us with this, final advice from your side for these future leaders.
Thank you. As you were speaking, I realized that, I talked about all the pressures on leaders. And I mean, there are some others. AI is one, which is an amazing challenge, which I think probably a lot of your listeners are very involved in. The good and the bad on that. And of course, climate change is creating all sorts of movement of people. And it's ironic, I think, that in society there's this big change, this push for separation. The Scottish want to be independent, the Welsh want to be independent. The Americans don't want to talk to anybody else, particularly if Donald Trump is in charge, and so on. And yet, at the same time, what actually we need are people coming together. We need community. We need the strength of difference coming together. So I just highlight that. And in terms of answering your question, I think that particularly in the tech world, things move so fast. You've got really bright people who think incredibly fast, and they're always looking for the next thing. Let's go, let's move, and they're working incredibly long hours. They're really passionate, and I think sometimes we lose sight of where we're going. And my organization is called Serenity in Leadership. It's not it's not by mistake that. I think sometimes we do actually have to give the space to breathe and reflect. And in terms of people coming together, if somebody comes into your office and they have a problem or they want to discuss something, are you able to switch off the screen, push the keyboard away from you, have a clear space on your desk, and look across from that to that person and say, I'm here and I'm with you. And I really what I'm saying is the greatest gift that one human being can give to another is their full presence.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Tom. Now, this is my final question. Where people can get in touch with you, Tom? Where we can find more about you and about your company.
Thank you very much. Yes. The company is Serenity in Leadership. So it's serenityinleadership.com. My name is Thom, Thom. So Thom at Serenity in Leadership. We have a YouTube channel So if you look up Serenity in Leadership, you'll find it. And we've got some amazing material there of all sorts of the different aspects of what I've been speaking about and some others. And look me up on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from people. I'd love to hear people's reactions to what I've been saying. I don't claim to be right. What I say, I believe in, and I'd love to hear people's experiences that match those and are very different, because I'm definitely one who wants to learn every day.
Absolutely. For the audience, you don't have to worry. All the links that just Thom mentioned, they will be in the show notes. So you don't have to look it up yourself. I will make your life easy. Again, Thom, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And all the insights, especially the final few words from you, like these are words really of wisdom for me. And I hope it's the same for the rest of the audience. And this is all what this podcast is all about. Yeah, we are a kind of a tech startup entrepreneurship podcast, that's true, but also we want to have the impact, the positive impact. And this is why the discussion today was all about this, how to make leaders better. So if we have better leaders, we have better outcomes, and better outcome for everyone. So again, thank you, Thom. And this is how usually I add my episodes. This is for the audience. If you just discovered this podcast by luck, thank you for passing by. I really appreciate that. If you did so, please don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the people who keeps sending me their suggestions, comments, and so on, thank you for doing so. Please keep doing that and keep sending me your suggestions. Whether I'm doing something good or bad, I would love to hear it. And as I say always, thank you very much for tuning in. We'll meet again very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.